Francisco Marcias Nguema, one of the worst African dictators, was the first president of Equatorial Guinea. His first name was Mez M. Nguema, but later changed it to Francisco Marcias Nguema after he was baptized by the Spanish Catholic missionaries. While his country was still under the rule of Spanish colonial masters, Marcias was an active politician who held several positions in the colonial government. In 1964, he was named as the deputy prime minister of the country to the then Prime Minister Bonifacio Ondo Edu. However, Marcias was mentally unstable, with early reports in 1968 indicating that he suffered from mental disorders and venereal diseases. This was made worse by his constant use of bhang and iboga, a traditional drink with strong hallucinogenic effects. Despite his sickness, Marcias went on to run for the 1968 general elections against the Prime Minister Bonifacio Ondo Edu. In campaigns, he sought the help of a Spanish lawyer who wrote speeches for him that convinced the masses. His chaotic behavior and appearances were viewed by the masses as a sign of a fearless and a charming leader. Marcias went on to win the elections, and after the country gained independence, he was sworn in as the first president of Equatorial Guinea on 12 October 1968. Just a year after he had been sworn in, his relationship with the Spanish government scrambled. He then turned to the Soviet Union, Cuba, and North Korea. The Cubans and the North Korean provided Marcias Nguema with soldiers and bodyguards. He admired the North Korean dictator, Kim Il-sung, and the two were friends. The first victim of his brutal regime was his own foreign minister and political rival, Atanasio Ndongo, who was arrested on charges of treason and later killed in March 1969. His rival, the former Prime Minister Bonifacio Ondo Edu, who had fled to Gabon, was captured and brought back to the country and killed. This was just the beginning. On the eve of Christmas 1969, 186 people who had opposed his government were executed inside Malabo Stadium. Around 150 of them were shot or hanged, while the remaining 36 were ordered to dig ditches in which they were buried up to their necks and eaten alive by red ants over the next few days. In 1971, he forced the entire population to undergo daily military training with wooden rifles. Later, on 7th May 1971, he issued a decree which gave him all direct powers of government and institutions. With all the powers vested on him, including the ones of the judiciary, he imposed a law that the death penalty as a punishment for threatening the president or the government while insulting or offending the president or his cabinet was punishable by 30 years in prison. On 14th July 1972, he merged all the political party under his own ruled party, United National Party, and named himself as president for life of both the nation and the party. Fears that the Spanish government was plotting to overthrow him, he offered promotion and rewards to anyone who would reveal a Spanish spy. At this rate, Francisco Marcias Nguema was just beginning, and things were about to get more worse. He forcefully made his mother tongue language Fang to be spoken notice for anyone caught using Spanish or other native languages. On July 29, 1973, he replaced the country constitution with a new document giving himself absolute power and formally made his party the only one legally permitted. He will then go on to establish a totalitarian regime with three important pillars: the United National Workers' Party, a youth militia group, and the Ensagui clan of the Rio Muni. With the absolute powers he had, Marcias started feeling as a demigod. He developed an extreme cult of personality that infiltrated the Catholic Church. Apparently, he ordered the Catholic priests to start a mass thanking the president while pictures of him were placed in churches, banned the use of the word intellectuals, and mandated death for those who wore glasses. His regime often imprisoned entire families, including the spouses and children of the suspects who opposed his government. In the country's main prison, Black Beach, prisoners were humiliated, starved to death, tortured, and murdered without due process. Some of the executions were witnessed by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who was his nephew and served as a military governor of Bioko and vice minister of the armed forces. From around 1974, he became paranoid about being overthrown and no longer slept at the presidential palace. Instead, he began staying at his fortified villa in his home village of Mongomo. His villa had a private bunker as well as a prison and was protected by a military camp. He would then go on imposing unreasonable laws, as on March 1975 he declared private education subversive and later banned it entirely. He then Africanized his name to Marcias Nguema Biogo Negue Ndong in 1976 after demanding that the rest of the Equatorial Guinean population to replace their Hispanic names with African names. In a move of Africanizing his country, he banned Western clothes, food and medicine for the rest of the population, stating that they were un-African. To punish those he thought did not want to work, he bought the little food available and resold it at prices that the vast majority population could not afford. He eventually outlawed Christianity and used the slogan, "There is no other God than Marcias," believing that Christianity supported anti-government plots or coup attempts. Marcias is believed to have the governor of the central bank killed and carried everything that remained in the national treasury to his private villa. In the middle of his rule, almost all judges in the country had fled or were jailed. His youth militias were the ones in charge of kangaroo courts in trials of his opposers. His government began falling apart following his repeated purges and unpredictable policies. In 1976, Marcias Nguema ordered that all children between the ages of 7 and 14 to receive military training and that any parent or person refusing would be imprisoned or shot. In response to this, tens of thousands of citizens fled in fear of persecution and to protect their personal safety and that of their children. But Marcias had a plan. To prevent people from escaping, he had the only road out of the country mined and camouflaged ditches with spikes constructed along the mainland border. Things were now getting worse, and as time went by, he began targeting intellectuals and skilled professionals such as government ministers, members of the National Assembly, and even members of his own family. By 1979, close to the end of his rule, Marcias Nguema had become increasingly withdrawn, often spending time mostly alone at his private villa and often wandering around, repeatedly saying the name of his victims, who he had killed. To make matters worse, in 1979, he organized for the execution of several members of his own family, leading to several members of his inner circle to fear that he was now mad. His brutal regime came to an end on August 3, 1979, when he was overthrown by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, whose brother was among those murdered by the president, overthrew him in a bloody military coup. Initially, Nguema and a contingent of loyal forces had tried to resist the coup upon hearing of it, but his forces eventually abandoned him. In an attempt to go to exile, he fled into the jungle of Rio Muni, but was captured on 18 August 1979. He was found by an old lady. He was exhausted, sitting beneath a tree and eating sugarcane. Obiang's troops proceeded to arrest him and found his nearby car stuffed full of suitcases with $4 million in cash. On 24 September 1979, Marcias Nguema and 10 other members of his government were convened to a military tribunal. The charges against them included genocide, mass murder, embezzlement of public funds, violation of human rights, and treason. On 29 September 1979, at noon, the military tribunal delivered sentences, ordering that Marcias Nguema and 6 others of his co-defendants to be sentenced to death and confiscation of their property. At this point, Nguema was sentenced to death 101 times. However, one problem arose, as Marcias Nguema reportedly swore that his ghost would return and take revenge on those who had condemned him. The Equatorial Guinean soldiers consequently refused to shoot him, forcing a group of hired Moroccan troops to instead be employed to carry out the sentence. Marcias Nguema, alongside the 6 other defendants who were sentenced to death by the military tribunal, were executed by the hired firing squad at Black Beach Prison at 6 p.m. on the same day. Francisco Marcias Nguema's regime was estimated to have killed between 20,000 to 80,000 people. By the end of his rule, over half of the population had been arrested at least once or had a relative who had been killed. His nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, took over as the president from 1979 till date.